Okay, guys, this is going to be our new right and left. So this is number 5 in your notebooks. So on the right-hand side, today's question is going to be, to what extent was American colonists' sense of betrayal after the French and Indian War legitimate? So what we want to investigate today was, up through 1754, the American colonists had a great deal of freedom. They had an economic relationship with their parent country, England, and the colonists fight on the side of the English during the French and Indian War. And after the war, the relationship between the American colonists and the English deteriorates. And we want to find out today, were the colonists right to feel betrayed or angry about how they were being treated after the French and Indian War? So the French and Indian War, it begins in 1754 and ends in 1763. Historically, it's known also as the 7 Years' War. Many people consider it the First World War. Here in North America, it was a war fought between the British, English, and their colonies against the French over control of the Ohio River Valley. So this war that's going to last 7 years and become known as the world's first World War actually starts in western Pennsylvania. All right, and it has to do with controlling access to the Ohio River Valley. So these were the motivations for the French and Indian War. The French motivation, they wanted to control the fur trade in North America. The British and their colonists, the English and their colonists, they wanted the land in the Ohio Valley for settlement. All right, and I'll explain that when we get to the map. Here we are at the map. Okay, so we've talked about this in class already, that these are the 13 original colonies. Their eastern boundary is the Atlantic Ocean, and this western boundary really is the Appalachian Mountains. So the English colonies are located in this narrow strip of land between the Appalachians here and the Atlantic Ocean here. This entire interior of North America, for the most part, is controlled by the French. And the French, their main settlements are up in Quebec and Montreal and down in New Orleans. So if you notice geographically, right, in order to connect New Orleans to Quebec, you need to find a water route, right? So we have St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, whoops, let's go back, sorry, the Great Lakes, and then you have the Mississippi here. And in order to connect here to here, you need this river, and that's the Ohio River. So the Ohio River was really important to the French because it could connect their entire empire in the interior of North America. It's important for the British and English, all right, British/English and colonists here, because they're getting squeezed by the Appalachian Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean. They need more room as more and more settlers come in. So their idea was, hey, if we can get over these Appalachians into this area, look at all this territory that we could have for our settlement. So there's a real conflict in this area as the French begin to move down and the English begin to move west. So before the British victory in the French and Indian War, these are the British colonies: Atlantic Ocean, Appalachian Mountains. I did it again. Appalachian Mountains, and this is French territory. After the British win in 1763, the British control all of this area up to the Mississippi River. Okay, so you have this huge expansion of British/English power. The winners and losers of the French and Indian War. The British. They won a huge North American empire. We just looked at that. But they lost in a sense that the war cost so much money. And the British had a huge debt. And in order to control this vast empire, they needed to keep more troops in the colonies to protect them from the Native Americans. So they had a lot of costs associated with the war, and they had a lot of further costs because they needed to keep troops in the colonies. So they had to figure out a way to deal with the issues, their money issues, their economic issues. So they had big debt and a lot of money going out and not a lot of money coming in. The American colonists, they were winners, right? There were new lands for them to settle and spread out. But as a result of the war, the British ended salutary neglect. And the other day in class, we talked about this idea of salutary neglect, meaning you don't follow the rules. You have rules, but you don't enforce them. And for 150 years, the British rarely enforced the rules. But now they begin to. So they began to more strictly enforce the laws, and they began to tax the colonists to cut costs and raise money. So remember, they're trying to eliminate their debt. So they have to cut the costs and at the same time raise money to pay that debt off. All right. So let's just go back real quick and look at the map. So this becomes this huge area that's controlled by the British. And now these colonists are flooding over the Appalachians into this territory. And that's creating more difficulty for the British because now they have to send troops west of the Appalachians to protect the colonists against Indians who are attacking them in this frontier. So although they had won this world war, and their empire was going to spread around the globe, they really had some issues in North America that they had to deal with. All right, so their first attempt to deal with these issues is the Proclamation of 1763. And what the proclamation did was it kind of drew an imaginary line along the crest of the Appalachian Mountains, and it's denoted here in the red line, and it forbid the colonists from going west of that line. But the colonists had just fought the war for that territory, so they ignored it. And this is the beginning of the end between the British rulers and the colonists, because this was the first rule that had been placed after the French and Indian War, and already the colonists were disobeying it. And they begin to flood anyway into this territory west of the Proclamation of 1763. All right, so this marks the end, the proclamation of the era of salutary neglect. Now the British are going to start to try to rule over the colonists with a more forceful hand than they had in the past. And that kind of ruins their relationship. And it's something that we'll talk about in class. But if your parents have a curfew and you continue to violate that curfew, it's 12 o'clock and you come in at 1 every time and nothing ever happens to you, and you keep coming in at 1 and then you come in at 2 and you come at 2:30 and then you do that for 10 years, and then when you're 26, your parents say, all right, no, you have to be home at 12, you can understand that you'd be angry. That's what salutary neglect was, right? They never enforced the rules, and then all of a sudden they wanted to enforce the rules, and the colonists were upset. All right, so this is the left-hand side. So we're done with the notes. So now you're going to go to your left-hand side of number 5. So a little intro to this left-hand side. After the French and Indian War, the British, in order to cut costs and raise money to pay off war debt, began to more strictly enforce mercantilism, which we talked about in class in lesson 4. They began to restrict colonial settlement, and they began taxing the colonists. So all these things are going on after the war, after the colonists helped the British win the war. Do you think many colonists were right in feeling angry for the change in British policy toward the colonies? So that's what we want you to answer now. Do you think they were right in feeling angry about this change in British policy? They go from no taxation to not restricting settlement to not enforcing mercantilism to doing all of those things. Were the colonists right to be angry about that? Remember, you have to have a claim, your reasoning, and evidence, and you can use the evidence from these slides and this screencast to help you with your answer. All right, good luck, and if you have any questions, you can contact us through the Remind, through Schoology, or through email.